Good morning. Joe Weinberg, Bluebird Semaphore. And today, it's already afternoon, 10 to 1. I've been out doing a few errands. And I'm going to continue with this book idea I had, which was to present old books. And by so doing, and whoever's listening and looking at these posts, maybe we'll see and come across books that otherwise they may not have. I did something on an article in the Encyclopedia Britannica, Volume 9, or the 9th edition, 1875, something on Michael and the Michaels of leadership positions, kings and such. Seemingly there was a Michael 1 through a Michael 10, from 800 thereabouts to 1200 thereabouts. And by the way, in the original post, I got those dates wrong. I said something like 1800 instead of 800. Anyway, I looked at that. I looked at, I believe I looked at something from Dickens. And was it Dickens? No. It was something from The Life of Shakespeare. And this was the infamous edition by the married couple of literary note. I want to say they're Charles and Mary Lamb. So I started that, and I marked where I left off, and I'll continue with that. Now, that was published, I think I noted it as something like after 1838, and certainly before 1895. Be that as it may, I also noted in that the original work by the two folks was in the time frame of 1806. That was Percy and Mary Lamb, right. So they're all old books. They're all old articles. This one I'm picked up today to do a little bit with. It's not that old. Actually, it's only from 1946, closely on the heels of the end of World War II. And it's a book by John Hersey with the title of Hiroshima. A very thin book. I'm not going to tell you exactly how many pages because I don't know right now, but I do know that it's referred to as a short book of perhaps 30,000 words. It's just pretty short. And what I'm going to do once again, I'm just going to read a brief section of it. And hopefully by doing that, you'll get a feel for the book and what the author is trying to do. He's pretty much trying to present in somewhat of a novel fashion of a novel, a story, the events in 6 individuals' lives closely after the bomb went off over Hiroshima. Now, that bomb killed about 100,000 people there in Hiroshima. And of course, it did immense destruction, damage, and suffering, and displacement of people, and so on. And And it is absolutely horrific. Absolutely horrific. And I haven't finished reading the book, but I've read at least half of it. And I'm very sympathetic to the Japanese people who got in the middle of all this. But one thing they never say is that we brought this on ourselves. It was our emperor. It was our military leaders. They never take responsibility for all that horror, you know. And I know that this is going to sound horrible, but somewhere I would have loved to hear them say, "Oh my God, what did we do by letting that maggot, the emperor, rule us with an iron fist? Why did we let all those stinking generals lead us around by the nose? We brought this on ourselves." Why didn't I hear any of that? No. All I hear is, help me, please, help me, please. I should have thought about these things before it happened. Now, once again, nobody's thinking like this. Everybody's thinking, the poor Japanese, the poor Japanese. What can we do to help them? Well, there's an old saying. Somebody up in the sky, he helps those who help themselves. And I think in the book, one of the individuals mentions that little saying. Or I may be getting my facts mixed up with some other book. And by the way, this short book and this more or less essay by John Hersey, it is focusing on the lives of 6 individuals. So, and perhaps what will happen is that if anybody reads this, they'll get a little more interest in it. And if they haven't as yet read the John Hersey book, Hiroshima, maybe they'll be tempted to do so. And that would be wonderful, because that is really one of my intent with all these talks on old books, is to see if I could spark a little interest in old books, because unlike newly written scholarship, much of what I'll be presenting will have a great deal of validity. A great deal. And by the way, I've jumped off the cliff into another tome, and this particular author gets bashed around a lot because the bashers are insinuating that he's more a speculative scientist. He's not doing good science, but he's doing more like speculation and coming up with his own theories on things. I'm not going to mention the fellow's name. He's highly regarded, well-known, top scientist of the 20th century. But I'm going to try to read that. It's fairly imposing. I've read some other things by him, and he's a little tough. But, that's for another day. Today we're talking about Hiroshima and John Hersey. So I'm just going to read the brief first part of this book, and I was wondering where and what part to jump in here. But first of all, I think the first part is fairly well known, and you may recognize it, and it seemed like the way to go. So that's the way I went. But anyway, this is the first chapter, Hiroshima, by John Hersey. The first chapter is entitled A Noiseless Flash. At exactly 15 minutes past 8 in the morning on August 6, 1945, Japanese time, at the moment when the atomic bomb flashed over Hiroshima, Ms. Toshiko Sasaki, a clerk in the personnel department of the East Asia Tin Works, had just sat down at her place in the plant office and was turning her head to speak to the girl at the next desk. At that same moment, Dr. Masakazu Fuji was settling down cross-legged to read the Osaka Asahi on the porch of his private hospital, overhanging one of the 7 deltaic rivers which divide Hiroshima. Mrs. Hetsuyo Nakamura, a tailor's widow, stood by the window of her kitchen, watching a neighbor tearing down his house because it lay in the path of an air raid defense fire lane. Father Wilhelm Kleinsorge, a German priest of the Society of Jesus, reclined in his underwear on a cot of the top floor of his order's 3-story mission house, reading a Jesuit magazine, Stemmen der Zet. Dr. Terumi Sasaki, a young member of the surgical staff of the city's large modern Red Cross hospital, walked along one of the hospital's corridors with a blood specimen for a Wasserman test in his hand, and the Reverend Mr. Kiyoshi Tanamoto, pastor of the Hiroshima Methodist Church, paused at the door of a rich man's house in Koi, the city's western suburb, and prepared to unload a handcart full of things he had evacuated from town in fear of the massive B-29 raid, which everyone expected Hiroshima to suffer. 100,000 people were killed by the atomic bomb, and these 6 were among the survivors. They still wonder why they lived, and so many others died. Each of them counts many small items of chance or volition, a step taken in time, a decision to go indoors, catching one streetcar instead of the next that spared him. And now each knows that in the act of survival, he lived a dozen lives and saw more death than he ever thought he would see. At the same time, none of them knew anything. And that's where I'm going to stop reading verbatim from Hersey's book. Only to point out that once again, all 6 characters are introduced there, and the book is going to continuously go in and out and point out what was going on in their lives during this close time after the bomb. And right away, you could see that they were in the midst of normal activities, getting their daily work activities started. A good deal of mention of religious people, so on and so forth, which, by the way, is one of my pet peeves with the whole thing that has to do with China and Japan and the Far East, is what tragic events followed the influx of missionaries into the Far East. Missionaries, Christian missionaries. What horrible events, what terrible things happen as a result of that, ardent desire to go preach and say what we're doing over here in the West is superior to what you're doing over there in the East. Come and learn our ways, and you will be saved. You will be lifted up to heaven in a fiery smoke. And a lot of that stuff, they weren't buying it. The Japanese kicked them all out at one time. But the Chinese, as far as I can tell, were buying into it hook, line, and sinker. And I kind of think because they saw an economic opportunity if they went Christian, So the point is that right away, two out of four of these at least are missionary types over there in Japan. And once again, it's one of my pet peeves because I think that the missionaries did them wrong, did those people a disservice. And no one on the face of the planet it will ever convince me that these people in the East, these people anywhere, are better off because they got the message from the big kahuna in the sky delivered to them by his Western leads. No one's going to convince me. Whatever their situation was for thousands of years, the Chinese and the Japanese were at least living, Did they slaughter each other? Yes. Were they horrible? Yes. But at least they were living their own lives. They weren't being, not avenged, but being militarily abused by invaders. So you're not going to convince me. Whatever those missionaries were thinking, they were thinking wrong. That's my opinion, and I'm going to stick to it until the day I die, that these were bad things the West did to the East. Bad things. Now, on the other hand, it's said often that these missionaries were actually softening up the Asians for a shot to the solar plexus to come in from the commercial crowd. So the missionaries would go over there, soften them up, get them used to Western ways of doing things, hearing Western speech, special Western clothes, and then boom, the commercial types would come in and bowl them over and take over, essentially, So that was the whole thing. And you get that point right away with the likes of David Livingstone, who, as far as I'm concerned, walked on water. But he got carried away. He was too much about always emphasizing that, don't forget, I'm paving the way for commerce here. I'm not just saving souls, I'm paving the way for commerce. And that's how they got away with it. If they were just beating up on these countries to take their commercial goods, their economic well-being from them, they would have been treated just as poorly and as harshly as King Leopold of Belgium was finally treated after his annihilation of the Congo and its people. So, listen, I'm going on and on and on and on, but I'm really hoping that this brief little introduction to an older book, 1946, which makes it about 78 years old, not really old, it's not 19th century, but it's a little old. It's still, by the way, as far as I know, in print. So you could go out and get a new Hiroshima. Plus, there's been, like a follow-up Hiroshima, like maybe written and put out in 1980s and 1990s, and a lot said about John Hersey's book. Hersey, by the way, John Hersey, born with a silver spoon in his mouth, went to the prestigious prep schools. One of them was a particular prep school for Yale. He went to Yale. He did all this stuff, And if you're going to be anyone in this country, you better go to an Ivy League school, and you better have gone to one of their prep schools, because that's where you really make your friends for life, who are going to help you every step of the way. All right, so don't wait until you're done with, let's say, LaSalle University or the University of Southern Illinois. It's not going to get you anywhere. Get your parents to make the bucks to get you into some sort of prestigious prep school. Although even the bucks aren't enough. You have to have the pedigree. You have to have the pedigree. The pedigree. If you don't have the pedigree, you're not going anywhere. Okay? So he did, John Hersey, he did, and he seems to have somewhat of he has the inclination to side with the downtrodden, which maybe doesn't make him a very popular type, but, naturally that's what he is and what he became. And if you read his list of works, you'll recognize a lot of them. So if you haven't, look up John Hersey and read some of his stuff. Now, if you're like me and you're doing catch up, because, I only came to start looking at world history and real events 50, 60 years ago. So I was already behind the eight ball. You got to start when you're real young. So I started later on, but at least I got the 50 or 60 years of it under my belt. But, so folks, Hiroshima, John Hersey, what happened when the big bomb went off? The big bomb. All right, that's enough. I'll be getting another old book at you soon. Okay, bye.